Okay, the topic that I've been asked to address today is infrastructure, and basically infrastructure consists of policy tools and also protocols. Luckily, George has already kindly covered much of the material that I was going to give you to give you a little background on trading. There are just one element here that wasn't mentioned, and that is the fact that legislation was passed first in 2010, authorizing the Maryland Department of Agriculture to be the certifier of agricultural credits for nitrogen and phosphorus, and then that same legislation was reenacted again in 2012, adding sediment to the mix. If you didn't already get one, there are handouts on all the tables of the proposed regulations, and so if you would like a copy, you can take one of those with you today. George also mentioned that unlike other states, Maryland does not allow trading to upgrade its wastewater treatment plants. And in addition to we have in the watershed implementation plans a schedule for upgrading all of our major facilities. And it's projected that we will probably have about 20 years of capacity before we need to resort to trading to meet our loading caps. And although agriculture has been expected to be the source for most of the credits in trading, there are ways that point sources can generate credits, and I've enumerated a couple of them there. Now, I'm always asked why is it, oh, I think I went past one here. Oh, I didn't, okay. I'm frequently asked, why is it that there have been no trades? Well, there have been no trades because there's basically been no demand. Obviously, we haven't had demand from the wastewater side, and we haven't had demand from the stormwater side because we haven't completed the policies that would cover that area. But that's all about to change because, as was noted in October, the two secretaries of Agriculture and the Environment announced a new trading policy statement that would, in fact, allow trading between the sectors. And the most important of these is obviously the Phase 1 MS4s. This has the greatest potential for trading because these are our largest jurisdictions, and they also have the most enormous costs that they need to meet. If we look at the agricultural non-point side, basically the stakeholder group that put together the policies for trading came up with 6 fundamental principles, and many of these have been mentioned today, but I'll just go over them quickly. To be eligible to trade, a generator of credits must meet the more stringent of either the Bay or the local TMDL. What this means, it basically means 2 things. Number one, it means that the farmer who is generating credits is already part of the solution because he's at baseline. And secondly, it puts the focus on local water quality. The second fundamental principle is that credit generators must be in compliance with all of the the laws of the local jurisdiction and the state and federal. And also, the third one was mentioned today too as well about BMPs that are funded by cost share programs not being eligible to generate credits until they're outside of their lifespan. This is something that, NRCS allows you, for example, to trade credits that are covered in cost share funds. Pennsylvania allows you to do that. In Maryland, we chose to allow the BMP to be re-inspected and recertified after it comes out of its contractual lifespan because we wanted to do 2 things. We wanted to, first of all, recognize the early adopters of conservation practices, and secondly, we wanted to make sure that those practices still stayed on the ground. The fourth principle is that credits cannot be generated, as George mentioned, by taking whole or substantial portions and converting them to trees or to other grasses, for example, or to pasture. And in Maryland, we have a significant body of policy dealing with the preservation of productive farm and woodlands. And so we need to balance the need for the trading program with other aims of the state as well. This is not, and the reason we haven't named a number, George, is because we don't want a hard and fast number. Because if I say you can take 50% of the farm out, you're going to take 50% of the farm out. What we want to do here is to deal with this on a case-by-case basis, and actually we did do an assessment on Trey Hill's some of his farms. And, you know, there was a possibility, if that trade had been conducted, that he could have taken, of those farms, 43% of the farm and converted it into bluestem grass. But we did not, that didn't happen because the trade wasn't completed. But why did we make that decision? Well, we went out and we looked at his fields, we looked at his plans, and we looked at the soil maps, and we saw that, you know, there were parts of the farm that were highly erodible lands. Well, those are not lands that we want to have in agricultural production. We'd rather have them in grass or in trees. And so if that's the case, then you'll be permitted to do that, no matter what the percentage is. But in terms of planting just your whole farm in trees, unless your farm is adjacent to a water body, you're really not gaining anything in terms of water quality, because the largest percentage of the reductions are in the first 100 feet. So it's actually better to have a buffer than to have the whole farm converted. The fifth principle is that to ensure a net decrease in loads, that we will apply 10% retirement ratio. This means that if you need to buy 500 credits, you would have to buy 550 credits, and the 50 credits would be retired for the benefit of the Bay. This also obviously provides a cushion in terms of how reliable the credits are, and if there's a failure of the credits, that we have an additional 10% that's available to us. And then finally, as George mentioned too, that an agricultural practice cannot generate credits until it's been installed and verified. I think this makes a lot of sense, and also it makes particular sense in Maryland, where we allow credits to be sold pending implementation. In other words, a farmer can put on the marketplace a practice that he does not yet have on the ground, and a buyer can pay to have that installed on his land. And so, as George said, if you install it, or you get ready to install it, because you have to plan and you have to actually do the work to have it installed, you do it in 1 year, and then you start generating credits in the following year. Now, how do you generate credits? Basically, credits can be generated from any planned agronomic, land conversion, or structural practice. Maryland, however, has very strict nutrient management regulations, and there are some practices that are required by the nutrient management laws, and as a consequence, they cannot be used to generate credits. These include things like manure incorporation, fertilization setbacks, and fencing. So they can count towards your baseline, but because they're required, you can't generate credits. And George brought up the categories 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 are credits that are loaded into the Bay model. They're already approved. Category 2 have some of these practices that are required, for example, by nutrient management regulation. Manure incorporation has not been in the Bay model, but it's required by nutrient management regulation, so I have to deal with it in some way. And actually, category 2 practices are those that often have temporary efficiencies already assigned to them by the Bay program, because they're in the process of looking at them, and manure incorporation is, in fact, one of those practices. Category 3 practices are those that are extremely innovative. Originated included oyster aquaculture, which is now under consideration. It might consider some of the biodigesters that are also under consideration by the Bay program. But there are new technologies that are evolving every day, and we want to make sure that there is, in fact, an avenue for those practices to come into the program. So that's why we did this. Now, in terms of the NonPoint source program structure, as it was mentioned multiple times, this is a voluntary program, and as Secretary Bartenfelder said, it requires a willing buyer and a willing seller. The program is market-driven. This means that the state provides the infrastructure, but we do not set the price of credits, nor do we conduct trades. We use an online suite of tools that Mindy covered a little bit about earlier. It's based on the original NutrientNet platform developed by the World Resources Institute, and it has 5 components: a calculator, registry, a marketplace, an administrative model, and an interactive mapping feature. And thank God Mindy took the time to go over with you the site-specific farm-scale calculation tool that we use. It's the CBNTT, and actually there are 3, within that platform, there are 3 state-specific programs. And one of them, and actually they're all, the whole entire platform is based on our program, which is the MNTT, or our tool that's used for calculation. And she went over the various parts, so I'm not going to go over that again, but I will mention that this is the same tool that's used in the certainty program to determine baseline compliance. And then since you've seen this slide, I can skip over that as well. Now, we've talked about the differences between our tool and the Bay model. And we have to, as Mindy indicated, calibrate our tool because in one case you're looking at a farm, which might be a few hundred acres, and on the other hand you're looking at the Chesapeake Bay Watershed model, which is 64,000 square miles. So you have obviously a huge difference in scale. So this is how the tools differ and how they approach the assessment that they're doing, and Rich covered some of the ways that the tool is beginning to, or the Chesapeake Bay model is beginning to bring these parameters inward, so we're getting closer towards each other. But as you see, we use very specific items that come directly from that particular farm. And whereas we, for example, use farm scale loads, the Bay model would use the basin scale average. We use the actual nutrient inputs that the farmer can verify and demonstrate from his nutrient management plan, as opposed to just whatever the extension recommendations were. And you can read each one of those for yourselves. What I'd like to do, though, now is to give you an example of how trading works. In this particular instance, we're just looking at nitrogen. And the soil test will tell you that the residual in the soil is 5 pounds. So the farmer then decides he's going to plant his corn crop, and he puts down 133 pounds of fertilizer, of nitrogen fertilizer, bringing his load up to 138 pounds. His crop, as it grows, takes up that fertilizer and subtracts 114 pounds, leaving him with 24 pounds in the soil. He has applied conservation tillage, and he has a number of grass buffers, and so he's able to reduce his load down to 8.5 pounds per acre, and it just so happens that the baseline for his segment is 8.9. So he has now met baseline, so he's now eligible to trade. He then adopts 2 additional practices. He puts in cover crops, and he installs a water control structure, and he generates 8 pounds of nitrogen credits per acre on his farm. Now, all of this is done through the tool that's found at the Nutrient Trading website. This is a joint website between the Departments of Agriculture and the Environment, and it's found at mdnutrienttrading.com. And anyone can go to this site, and you can open an account there, and you can actually become a landholder. You can go to a different site in Maryland, and you can play around with a piece of land, and you can put crops on it, you can put animals on it, you can put bison, you can put llamas, whatever you want. This is what the tool looks like when you come in as a user. You enter in your username and your password. All data in the tool is password protected. I'm the only super administrator right now of the tool, and I can't get into your data. So if I can't see it, nobody else can. This is what the interactive mapping feature looks like. The first thing you would do is you would go to the site, you would enter into the tool, specifically where your farm is located. Then you would use the map to identify your site by drawing the outline of the farm. That's the purple outline that's shown there. And then you would draw in each of the individual fields of the farm. This farm actually is a real farm. It's in Caroline County on the Eastern Shore. And the next thing that the tool would ask you to do is to input all the data for your current operation on a field-by-field basis. So here you would put in, once again, it shows your location. This is the Chapel branch of the Chop Tank. It's on the Eastern Shore, and you can see it does not have a local TMDL. It just has a Bay TMDL. And so you would identify what type of field you have. The tool also asks you whether this is next to a water body, whether it's adjacent to a water body, because then some of the nutrient management regulations come into play. And you enter all this data as we go through the tool for both your current operation and for your planned operation. And the tool has it as an incredibly wonderful, and copying feature so that you can run multiple scenarios. And to answer a question that was asked earlier today, how do you determine which practice would be the most beneficial to you? You can actually run a scenario using different BMP combinations and see how you can generate the most credits by doing that. The next thing you would enter in is all of your cropping information. When you plant your crop, your commercial fertilizer, if you use manure, you would enter in your tillage operations, your harvest operations, and don't forget you're going to do this for every field, and you're going to do it both for your current and your future operation. Then next thing that you do is you enter in your BMPs, and once again the tool asks you about fertilizer setback, because if you can't answer these questions in the right way, you won't be allowed to go forward. And so you then enter in all of your different BMPs and your other best management practice. And then the tool takes the parameters that Mindy described earlier from the NTTs, such as soil, slope, temperature, weather, et cetera, and does all the efficiencies from the discounted efficiencies from the Watershed model. And it comes up with a farm summary. And it does this on both a field-by-field basis as well as a summary for the whole farm. And if you look here, you can see that this farm meets its baseline for all three pollutants. It meets it for nitrogen, phosphorus, and for sediment. It also will tell you what your delivery ratio is, because this is close to the bay. It has a 1-to-1 delivery ratio. There are no animals on this farm. And there are, in Maryland, you do have the opportunity to trade in separate marketplaces. In other words, if this farm met in nitrogen but did not meet in phosphorus, the farmer could trade in the nitrogen marketplace, but obviously he could not trade in the phosphorus marketplace. Now, how do we know that credits are real? Oh yes, okay, that's good. And the way that we do that is we look at some of the ways that we ensure that the credits are valid, that they're reliable, and that we have a transparency and accountability. And we also have very stringent certification, verification, and registration protocols. So I'm going to go through a couple of these just to illustrate them and how they work. Sorry, I went the wrong direction here. Yes. The first one is the use of the TMDL. As I said before, a farm must meet the more stringent of either the local or the Bay TMDL. These are the Bay TMDLs for each of the 5 watersheds in Maryland: the Patuxent, the Potomac, the Susquehanna, the Western Shore, and the Eastern Shore. Now the tool, even though there are 3 trading zones that were mentioned earlier, because the last 3 are combined into one, the tool calculates on the basis of the basin where the farm is located. And as you can see, there's some significant differences between the baselines. You have a low of 10.3 for the Patuxent and a high of 24.9 for the Potomac. But if you look at the comparison between the Bay TMDL and the local TMDL, there can be some considerable differences. And once again, remember, the baseline is the more stringent of the two, so you're always looking at local water quality. And as you can see here, this is the Chester River on the Eastern Shore, that the TMDL for nitrogen is 11.7 pounds under the Bay TMDL, but it's only 6.9 pounds under the local TMDL. So that means instead of having to reduce your nitrogen by 61%, you have to reduce it by 77%. And the same thing, as you can see, is true for phosphorus. If we go back to the agricultural worksheet, I want us to look at some of these numbers as well. In some states, you get to generate credits. You know, your baseline is sort of where your farm is now, and in the future, what you do, and you get to take all the credits. In Maryland, because you have to meet a baseline requirement to begin with, and sometimes you have to meet that to start with, but sometimes a farmer is already below the baseline. And in this case, that's what's shown here. The baseline in nitrogen is 2,310 pounds per year, and he only has a current load of 1,200 pounds. Now in Maryland, he's not allowed to trade the difference, the 1,100 pounds there. He's only allowed to trade the difference between his current load and his future load, because there's a concept known as additionality, where these practices are already there on the ground. So in most cases, unless it's an annual practice, I can't really back it out of his situation. I mean, a wetland is there. You have to continue to work with it. So his credits here, instead of being like 1,100 pounds, or if you could add them all together, 1,800 pounds, he generates 438 credits. And the same is true. You can see the reduced numbers for phosphorus and for sediment as well. And by the way, the tool calculates sediment in both tons and in pounds, because it's shown two different ways, depending on what you're reporting to. And then how do the trading ratios affect the number of credits? If you have a 1-to-1 delivery ratio, obviously, when you have 1,000 credits, you've got 1,000 credits to sell. If you're, for example, located in Washington County, your delivery ratio might be 0.58. So instead of having 1,000 credits to sell, you only have 580 to sell. Because once again, there's a difference between, the delivery factor accounts for the differences in location, because as pollutants move downstream, there's not so much pollutant delivered to the main stem of the bay, and credits are denominated in delivered loads. And in the second scenario, probably somewhere in Cecil County, where the delivery ratio is 0.8, instead of having 1,000 credits to sell, a farmer will only have 800 to sell. And I mentioned the retirement ratio already. This is paid by the buyer. In other words, the buyer would have to buy the 550 credits, and the 50 credits would be retired permanently for the good of the bay, and to provide an additional cushion to the reliability of the credits. Now, if we turn to certification, this is something that I do. And basically what a farmer would do, there's a form called the Credit Registration and Certification Form. He would fill that out, and some of it is populated already by the program itself. In other words, it will put in your BMPs and all that sort of stuff. But then you have to submit this along with your farm summary that we looked at earlier, but you would submit the field-by-field version, which would show all of the activities that take place on that field. It would report your tillage, your fertilization, your planting dates, your harvest dates, etc. And then I would expect to have a map showing all of your fields so that I can match it up with what you submitted. And I would also have a map that showed me where all your field BMPs were, so that when we go out to do the verification, we know what we're looking for on your farm. And then you're also required to submit your nutrient management plan, your soil and water quality plan, and if you have animals on your farm, your waste storage plan. Now in Maryland, unlike some other states, a site visit is required, and it's required before certification is granted. So someone will come out to your farm, and they will verify whether these practices actually exist, and they will also look to see that any practices that you have proposed are not only appropriate, but they would be effective. For example, John Roderick, who was at the Department of Ag for many years, always liked to use the example of planting trees at the top of the hill. Well, obviously, they don't do anything to help water quality there. And then Maryland also has very strict verification protocols. In addition to the initial site visit, practices could be subject to 3 additional verification times. For credits that are certified pending implementation, you would have to have the practice inspected to make sure that it's been installed according to the standards and specifications and that it is fully operational. There's also an annual inspection that's required, and this would be done by an independent third party. And then MDA, like it does on its own cost share programs, would do a 10% spot check of all traded credits. Now, MDA requires the use of a certified verifier to conduct these initial visits and annual inspections. And the credentials that are required to be a certified verifier is you have to be a certified nutrient management planner, you have to be a qualified conservation planner, and you have to have demonstrated competency in the use of the tool. And yes, there is a test. And then the next step would be registration, where the credits are given a unique registration number and they're put in the public registry, and they're given a number that it prevents them from being duplicated, so someone could not sell these credits again. And the registry lists the information there, and actually if you know how to read the registration number, it contains a lot of that same information because the registration number is based on the FIPS system, which used the state, county, and then we put in the pollutant, and we put in the year of the credit. And then when credits are posted to the registry, all of the documentation becomes subject to public scrutiny. And we do require that requests be made through the Public Information Act, but you can look at the data. Then I wanted to show you some of the pages on the other parts of the website, because as I said, we have these other components. And this is what the verification management page looks like. Shows you the status of verifications. And then this is the public registry, which would list all the credits that have been registered and could be available for purchase and sale. Then I also, while I have this time, I wanted to bring you up to date on some of the latest developments. MDA received a $500,000 grant to do some additional work on our tool, and one of the things that we are working on is the development of a complementary calculation tool that can be used by the development and offset community, or development and jurisdictions, to calculate their offset needs. And this tool will be located on the same website with the ag tool, so that, you know, if you come in there, they will look somewhat similar. And it means that both sides, the buyers and the sellers, can meet in the same place, and you basically have one-stop shopping. I'm expecting to take delivery of the beta version of the tool next week, and we'll go into testing later this month. And I wanted, because I know I have some people here from the jurisdictions, I wanted them to see a little bit about how this tool looks. Basically, it'll be very similar to the ag tool, where the red line is the outline of your project. Then you would put in the specifics of your project. This happens to be a plan for 14 single-family homes. And the new tool will have the ability to import shape files, which is a real breakthrough for us. And then the tool calculates your offset needs. And in this case, as I said, it's calculated using land types, and it would calculate your pre-development load, your post-development load for both stormwater and wastewater, and it would calculate the number of credits that you would need. In this case, it's 258.9 pounds of, I think this is nitrogen, yes, total nitrogen. And it also gives you the load per unit. Now, the developer in this case has a couple of choices, as George pointed out. He can go ahead and he can buy credits and offset his load. He might also be able to do additional mitigation on site and reduce the number of credits that he can buy. Or there is the possibility that we would have a fee in lieu, and he could pay that and dispense with the whole thing. We also have another grant from the EPA through the CBIG program to do some additional enhancements to the registry, and what we're going to be doing there is the registry will be made available for all of the states that are participating in trading, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and so that there will be a registration site where we can look at all the credits and see what's going on, and we can also generate the reports that are required by the EPA. And this is a mock-up of what the site would look like. This is the approved list of projects that would be in the public registry. And then we have the market listings. And the way this works is the credits do not automatically go on the marketplace, because sometimes credits are certified where they already have a buyer. So that the person who owns the credit would choose to post his credits for sale, and any buyer who would be interested could also post their need for credits. And so this would be the place where the two sides would meet. I also want to mention to you in closing that we're going to be holding a training session on the use of the tool on January the 22nd at MDE in Baltimore City. So if you're interested in learning how to use the tool, or you're in the process of becoming a certified verifier, you need to complete this training. And if you're interested, you can go to the website, and it will give you some information, and it also will have my email address, so you can contact me. Also, my contact information is obviously right there, so that you can also contact me or call me on the phone if you're interested, and I'd be really happy to have some of you attend and learn more about the tool.